Good morning. This is Barry Bryson, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. Today we're going to be looking at 1 Peter, and we're looking at it as a manual for surviving persecution. I want to begin by reading this little excerpt from the Annals of Tacitus, which gives us a history of the Roman Empire, 1st century, and this is from his chapter on he actually has 3 or 4 chapters, sections on the burning of Rome, which started on July 19th, AD 64. And this is about Nero accusing the Christians, even though everyone knew that Nero was likely the source of the Great Fire of Rome, in which hundreds, perhaps thousands, were killed and a good portion of the city of Rome burnt to the ground. As we mentioned yesterday, Christians have been recognized as being separate from Judaism and practicing an illegal religion, which means they're committing a capital offense according to Roman law. And anyway, Tacitus talks about what happened to the Christians in Rome. He said, "An arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, then upon their information an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of setting fire to the city as of hatred against them as human beings. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. They were covered in the skins of beasts and were fed to the dogs and perished, or they were nailed to crosses or doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. Nero offered his gardens for such a spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus when he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer and stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion, for it was not, as it seemed, for the public good that they were treated this way, but in order to glut one man's cruelty, that they were being destroyed." Well, even at this first instance of executions at the hand of the empire, people were moved with compassion towards Christians because of the cruel and unjust way that they were treated. This, however, was not the last, but just the first in a series of events, some of which happened empire-wide, some which was more locally centralized, but Christians are going to be persecuted for the next 200 plus years. And over the course of time, Christians used 1 Peter as the manual because it was written literally the day after these things happened. So the Apostle Peter writes in chapter 4, verse 12 and 13, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you which comes upon you for your testing, as though something strange were happening to you. But to the degree that you share with the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation." What Peter says generally about persecution is that it is what we have as God's people. Jesus preached this in the Sermon on the Mount. That's how the Beatitudes end. If you were treated unfairly and persecuted, you should rejoice. That's how they treated the prophets who were before you. And your reward in heaven will be great. He's taught this by Jesus already. He makes clear in chapter 1, beginning with verse 3, that the persecution they are experiencing will in no way take away what they have to keep in God. And then he talks about their getting their own house in order. In chapter 2, talks about Jesus' role in God's plan, that he has to be the rejected stone if he's going to be the stone that saves us, and tells us that through Jesus we are a people of God's own possession, a royal priesthood, a nation of priests. Therefore, since we are aliens and strangers in this world, we have to keep our behavior excellent so that in the day of visitation, the day of persecution, they can see our good deeds and glorify our Father in heaven. This is going to be the message of Christians for the next 300 years. We are law-abiding citizens. Why are you doing this to us? the most important thing that he says, and I encourage you to read the whole letter, he says at the heart of the letter in chapter 3, a passage that is not about debate club. It's about being interrogated before your execution. And he says in chapter 3, verse 15, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. Now that Paul has done his whole life, even though he's made plenty of mistakes, Jesus was always number one in his heart. And if that's true for us as well, we can face every form of persecution. Well, thank you. We'll talk about 2 Peter tomorrow and use it as a manual to face false teaching. We'll see you then.